There are days that begin completely ordinary. The school bell rings, children file out into the February cold, backpacks bouncing, looking for the person who is always there. But that afternoon in Quincy, Illinois, nobody came. The three Bliefnick boys stood waiting, and when the call went out that they hadn't been picked up, their father, Tim, contacted their grandfather Bill and asked him to go check on Becky. Bill arrived at the house. He went inside, moved through the rooms, climbed to the second floor, and then he found her. His daughter, Becky Bliefnick, on her bathroom floor. She had been shot 14 times. Her bedroom door had been kicked open. A window in one of her children's bedrooms had been pried from the outside. Whoever had done this hadn't stumbled across her. They had come through a child's empty room, in the middle of the night, specifically for her. What investigators assembled over the following weeks wouldn't simply be a murder case. It became a detailed reconstruction of a marriage that had collapsed into something far more dangerous than anyone outside the family understood, and a digital trail so deliberate, so methodical, that even the lead prosecutor described the crime as unlike anything the city had seen. By the time this case reached a courtroom, the question was never really who had the motive. The question was how far back the planning had actually gone. Tell me in the comments which detail from that opening already stands out to you most. We are barely into this case, and what investigators found next made everything before it look like the easy part. Becky Bliefnick was 41 years old when she died. She worked as a registered nurse at Blessing Hospital in Quincy, and the hospital had recognized her with the Daisy Award, given specifically to nurses who demonstrate exceptional compassion toward their patients. Her sister Sarah would later describe her in court as someone who thought of every person in her life as genuinely important. Her three boys, 12, 10, and 5 years old at the time of her death, were the center of everything she did. Friends and colleagues who took the stand during the trial used the same words repeatedly: devoted, warm, the kind of person who showed up. Tim Bliefnick's name carried a different kind of recognition in Quincy. He had been a star college football player. He worked in sales, coached youth sports, moved comfortably through most rooms. To people who knew them in those earlier years, the Bliefnicks fit the picture. The family a tight-knit Midwestern community produces, and tends not to question. But by the time Becky was killed, that picture had been coming apart for a long time. The couple had separated and filed for divorce. By February 2023, they had been fighting through attorneys for an extended period over custody of their 3 children, financial arrangements, spousal support, and the marital home. They lived in separate houses roughly a mile apart. Tim himself would describe the divorce at one point as brutal. Court documents reflected accusations of poor parenting and harassment from both sides. Becky had sought an emergency restraining order, describing Tim to friends and co-workers as erratic, vengeful, and unpredictable. Someone she believed would go to extremes if he didn't get what he wanted in the proceedings. That restraining order was ultimately not granted. A judge ordered them to stay away from each other's homes except during child exchanges. What Becky told the people closest to her, though, went further than any legal filing. In July 2022, she sat down with a friend named Gary Collins and told him tearfully that she believed Tim was hiding assets in the divorce. She also told him that if anything ever happened to her, she wanted people to know who was responsible. Around that same period, she sent a text message to her sister Sarah. It read in full, "If something ever happens to me, please make sure the #1 person of interest is Tim. I am putting this in writing, that I'm fearful he will somehow harm me, come after me, or will try to do something to me that takes me away from the kids, or the kids away from me. He already has lied multiple times to paint himself as a victim and me as the perpetrator, when it is absolutely the other way around." Sarah did not relay that message to police before Becky died. She didn't believe anything would actually happen. That's the part that never fully goes away. There was something else Becky told a friend that didn't make it into the legal filings but came out at trial. Witness Melissa Young testified that she had run into Becky at a TJ Maxx in the months before the murder. Becky appeared, in Young's words, mentally and emotionally exhausted. She told Young what Tim had said to her directly: "You'll be dead before you get any of my money." Around the same period, Tim had called police and asked them to return a 9mm handgun to Becky, a gun that had been hers, because he didn't want to hand it back to her face-to-face. Police declined the request. The gun was never returned to Becky. An empty gun safe was later found at Tim's home. The divorce trial was scheduled to begin 1 week after February 23, 2023. Becky had recently had surgery and was still recovering at home. Because of that, her 3 boys were with Tim that night. When the intruder entered through the upstairs window, none of the children were there to witness what was about to happen. Prosecutors would later argue that wasn't a coincidence either. At approximately 1:11 in the morning on February 23rd, Becky's phone placed an outgoing call to 911. The call didn't connect properly, but the timestamp told investigators everything they needed to know about when the intruder had entered. According to the prosecution's opening statement at trial, Becky heard the window being forced. She ran to her bedroom. She tried to hold the door shut. The intruder pushed through it. Becky retreated to the attached bathroom, and that is where she was shot 14 times with a 9mm firearm. Quincy Police Chief Adam Yates put it plainly in an interview. "Why would you shoot someone 14 times when you could have shot them twice and killed them?" It seemed like someone was coming for Becky. At the crime scene, investigators found something they couldn't immediately identify. Scattered near Becky's body were small fragments of plastic. Thin, unremarkable, the kind of thing that might go unnoticed in a less careful examination. The state's attorney's office took a closer look. The fragments were remnants of an Aldi grocery store bag. That detail seemed almost mundane. Prosecutors would later argue it was the most consequential piece of physical evidence at the scene. The initial theory pointed toward a burglary gone wrong. Forced entry, a window broken from the outside, a body inside, but nothing of obvious value had been taken. Becky's belongings were undisturbed in ways that didn't fit someone searching the home. This was not a random crime. Becky's sister Sarah was one of the first people investigators spoke with, and she gave them a name immediately: Tim Bliefnick. She told them about the contentious divorce, the upcoming trial, the fear Becky had been expressing for 2 years. From that point, detectives began working outward. Neighborhood cameras, cell phone records, any footage showing movement around Becky's street in those early morning hours. 3 camera systems in the neighborhood had recorded the same thing. Cameras at a Quincy Public Schools bus barn on 20th and Hampshire, at a private residence on South 20th Street, and at the home of Becky's next-door neighbor, Taylor Hyman, had all captured a figure on a bicycle, moving in the direction of Becky's house, and back again, in the early hours of the morning. Not just on February 23rd. The same pattern appeared in footage from February 14th, February 21st, and February 22nd. Hyman's camera had been sending him alerts about motion on his property from February 14th through the 22nd. 2 notifications on the night of the 22nd alone. Investigators couldn't identify the cyclist from the footage. The image was too grainy, the night too dark, but the pattern across 4 separate nights refused to be explained away. Investigators also had access to Tim Bliefnick's Whoop fitness tracker data, a wearable device that continuously records biometric and movement information. When detectives combed through millions of data points, they found something that didn't fit. On those exact same mornings, February 14th, 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, Tim's tracker had been disconnected in the early hours. On every other night, it worked normally. Prosecutor Josh Jones addressed it directly in closing. On the nights when the cyclist wasn't on camera, Tim's Whoop was fine. On the nights the cyclist appeared, the device went dark. There was something else about those nights. Investigators also found that on those same early mornings, Tim's iPhone was locked, and his laptop showed no activity during the same windows. 3 separate devices, all dark at the same time, on the same 4 nights the cyclist appeared. At this point, let's talk in the comments, because honestly it's a lot. Which piece of evidence do you find hardest to account for? The tracker, the phone, the laptop, all 3 together, or something else entirely? The prosecution still had more to add. One more piece of the timeline became significant at trial. In January 2023, weeks before the murder, Tim had a conversation with his next-door neighbor, Bradley Emmon. He asked Emmon whether he had security cameras. Emmon said yes. Tim then asked if any of those cameras faced his backyard. Emmon said they didn't. The defense, during cross-examination, noted that Emmon had experienced trespasser problems in the past, and that the question could be explained by that. But the prosecution placed the conversation in a different context entirely. A man checking his surveillance exposure roughly a month before his estranged wife was killed. The bicycle became the physical link that connected what the cameras had captured to what detectives found on the ground. Days after Becky's murder, police located an abandoned bike less than half a block from Tim's home. No reflectors on the wheels. exactly matching what was visible in the surveillance images. Investigators traced the purchase through Facebook Marketplace. The account that bought it was registered under the name John Smith. That account was linked to Tim Bliefnick's iPhone. A second similar bicycle was found in his garage. When police executed a search warrant on Tim's home and vehicle on March 1, 2023, the list of what they recovered was extensive. In his basement, a crowbar, 54 spent 9mm shell casings, a collection of Aldi grocery bags, and an empty gun safe. The same safe where, according to evidence presented at trial, a 9mm handgun had previously been stored. The firearm itself was never recovered. The shell casings told their own story. Forensic analysts determined that 8 casings found at the crime scene near Becky's body had been fired from the same gun as 27 of the casings from Tim's basement. The same weapon had been used in both locations. Becky's DNA was found on an Aldi bag at Tim's home. The crowbar recovered from his basement was microscopically consistent with the tool marks left on the exterior of the window that had been pried open. A trace chemist tested the theory behind those plastic fragments found near Becky's body, that a grocery bag had been wrapped around the handgun and used as a crude improvised suppressor, either to muffle the sound or to catch the ejecting casings. Officers reproduced the method and found that the shards it produced were consistent with what was scattered at the scene. The defense challenged whether the Aldi bag fibers from the crime scene actually matched those from Tim's home, making it one of several contested points the jury would need to weigh. This channel covers cases the way this one deserves. Court records, verified testimony, nothing invented. Subscribing means you'll be there for the next one. There are more cases like Becky's than most people know. Now, when Tim Bliefnick was arrested on March 13, 2023, 17 days after Becky's death, the case became national news almost immediately. Not primarily because of the evidence, because of a television clip.
It's been dubbed the Family Feud murder by the tabloids. Husband and father Timothy Bliefnick making this now haunting joke during a taping of the game show that aired nationally in 2020.
What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?
Honey, I love you, but said I do.
Harvey gave him a flat, expressionless look. Tim backpedaled. It's not my mistake. I love my wife. The studio laughed and the episode moved on. When the clip resurfaced after Tim's arrest and ran alongside his booking photo, the reaction was something the show, the producers, and Tim himself could not have anticipated. It spread across social media platforms within hours. National media picked it up. People who had never heard of Quincy, Illinois found themselves watching a man laugh about his marriage on a game show, and then learned what he had been charged with. The contrast was difficult to process. Tim himself later addressed it in an interview, saying the answer wasn't said with malice or bad intentions. He called it a joke. Investigators, including the prosecutor, confirmed that the Family Feud appearance was never considered evidence of anything. But for the public watching from a distance, the clip became the lens through which the entire case was first understood. Then came a second wave of reaction, and this one landed closer to home. When it became known that the judge assigned to preside over Tim Bliefnick's murder trial was Robert K. Adrian, people in Quincy knew exactly who that name belonged to. In October 2021, Adrian had presided over a bench trial and found 18-year-old Drew Clinton guilty of criminal sexual assault for attacking a 16-year-old girl at a graduation party. The charge carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 4 years in prison. But at Clinton's sentencing hearing on January 3, 2022, Adrian reversed his own verdict. He said that the 148 days Clinton had already spent in county jail was, in his words, plenty of punishment. He told the court, by law, the court is supposed to sentence this young man to the Department of Corrections. This court will not do that. He went further, making remarks from the bench that appeared to place responsibility on the circumstances surrounding the victim. The victim, Cameron Vaughn, said she was completely shocked. The prosecutor in that case, who had spent 40 years in the courtroom, said she had never seen anything like it. The case sparked national outrage. Adrian was briefly removed from the criminal court docket. Despite that, he retained his circuit judge seat in the November 2022 election, and by early 2023, he was back on criminal cases. When his name was attached to the Bliefnick murder trial, the reaction in Quincy was sharp. Many people, particularly those who had followed the Drew Clinton case, questioned whether the man who had reversed a sexual assault conviction was the right judge to oversee one of the most high-profile murder cases the city had seen. Becky's family, her supporters, and domestic violence advocates watched the assignment with deep unease. There was also a legal wrinkle the defense would later raise in appeal. Prosecutor Josh Jones, who was trying the Bliefnick case, had been involved in the judicial inquiry proceedings against Adrian. At the same time Adrian was presiding over the trial. The defense argued that created a conflict of interest and that Adrian should have recused himself. The appellate court reviewed that argument and found it did not require a new trial. What happened inside that courtroom, however, unfolded without interference. The prosecution's theory was specific and methodical. Prosecutors argued that Tim Bliefnick had researched, planned, and practiced this crime. His internet search history, pulled from his phone and laptop, included how to make a homemade pistol silencer, how to open a window from the outside, how to use a crowbar to open a door, Quincy Police Department response times, and how to clean gunpowder off your hands. The prosecution also presented evidence that on the night of February 14th, the first night the cyclist appeared on surveillance cameras, Tim's phone ran searches on the license plate of a vehicle parked outside Becky's home between 1:10 and 1:48 in the morning. That vehicle belonged to Ted Johnson, a man Becky had been seeing. Johnson testified at trial that he had spent the night at Becky's home that evening. Prosecutors argued that Tim had gone to her house that night, seen an unfamiliar car, run the plate, and left. He returned on the 21st, the 22nd, and finally on the 23rd, the night Becky was home alone. Becky's sister, friends, co-workers, and divorce attorneys all testified about the fear Becky had expressed in the years leading up to her death. The defense, during cross-examination, pointed out that many of those statements dated to 2021, when the divorce proceedings were at their most hostile, and argued that bitter divorce language didn't constitute evidence of murder. Defense attorney Casey Schnack, who had been Tim's divorce attorney before becoming his murder defense attorney, told the jury the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. No murder weapon was ever recovered. No fingerprints placed Tim inside Becky's home. 6 pairs of shoes had been taken from Tim's home, for comparison against a footprint found at the scene. None matched. Schnack argued the prosecution had never seriously considered other suspects, and that the evidence didn't conclusively prove Tim was the man who entered that window.
We are left with emptiness that cannot be filled.
That's the voice of Rebecca Bliefnick's mother, Bernadette Postal, as she sits just a few feet away from her son-in-law, a convicted killer who'll spend the rest of his life in prison.
Your soul is black with hate. Your heart has only love for itself. You should never be allowed to be free again.
And he won't be. Bliefnick's attorney Casey Schnack asked Judge Robert Adrian for leniency, to consider her client's behavior before the offense, that he had a clean criminal record.
Life without parole should be reserved for the worst of the worst, and Tim is not the worst of the worst.
The state presented over 200 pieces of evidence. They called 36 witnesses. The defense called none. They presented no evidence of their own. The jury deliberated for just over 4 hours. On May 31, 2023, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. 2 counts of first-degree murder, and 1 count of home invasion. At sentencing on August 11, 2023, Judge Robert K. Adrian addressed Tim Bliefnick before imposing the sentence.
You broke into her house, and you shot her. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times.
He gave Bliefnick's estranged wife justice.
Becky was not the only helpless victim on February 23rd.
Yes, the night of the murder, Bliefnick left he and Rebecca's 3 sons at his home on Hampshire Street, while he rode a bicycle to their mother's home to kill her. Now they're left without a mom or dad.
Did you think about 12-year-old Deacon as you broke through his window with a crowbar?
Right before Judge Adrian sentenced 40-year-old Bliefnick, he gave him the opportunity to address the court.
Is there anything you'd like to say?
No, Your Honor.
Then he learned his fate and was escorted out of the courtroom.
Knowing he will face a lifetime of isolation and emptiness behind bars is only a small solace as we try to make sense of this inconceivable world without Becky.
Adrian sentenced him to natural life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Becky's sister Sarah looked directly at Tim from the witness stand, as she described the impossibility of accepting that her sister was gone, that every video she found of Becky laughing made her forget for a moment, before the grief came back. She told the court what Tim had taken, not just from Becky, from 3 children who would grow up with something no child should have to carry. Someone in your life would sit with this case the way you have. Send it to them. Cases built this carefully, on forensic evidence, verified court records, a digital trail that took real investigative work to reconstruct, are worth passing along. Following sentencing, Tim's legal team filed an appeal on 3 grounds. The first argued that evidence admitted under the forfeiture by wrongdoing doctrine, which allowed Becky's own statements about Tim to be heard by the jury even though she couldn't testify, was improperly included and unfairly prejudicial. The second argued the prosecution made statements to the jury that went beyond the evidence. The third raised the conflict of interest issue, that Adrian should have recused himself given that Prosecutor Jones had adverse testimony pending against him in the Judicial Inquiry Board proceedings, creating an improper dynamic throughout the trial. In November 2024, the Illinois Appellate Court's 4th District reviewed all 3 arguments and affirmed the conviction and sentence in full. Judge Adrian himself did not escape the consequences of the Drew Clinton case. In February 2024, the Illinois Courts Commission ruled that he had given untruthful testimony during the disciplinary proceedings, testimony the commission described as willful misconduct that brought the judicial office into disrepute. He was removed from the bench immediately. Becky's murder trial was among the last significant cases he presided over as a judge. Tim Bliefnick remains at Menard Correctional Center. He has maintained his innocence publicly. Becky's 3 sons now live with her parents, Bill and Bernadette, who are in the process of adopting them. The divorce trial that was set to begin 1 week after February 23rd never happened. The custody dispute, the financial arguments, the court dates, all of it became irrelevant on the morning Bill climbed those stairs and found his daughter. Prosecutors, investigators, and the people who loved Becky have all returned to the same thing in the years since. She told people. She was specific. She put it in writing. She named him. She told a friend at a casual encounter in a store. She asked police to return a gun and was told they couldn't. She sent text messages that described her fear in clear, direct language, and the systems around her, the restraining order process, the divorce proceedings, the legal machinery, moved at the pace those systems move, which is never the pace of someone who has already made a decision. The jury's verdict and every appellate ruling since have drawn a legal conclusion. But what Becky's family lives with isn't a legal question. It's the one that doesn't fit in a courtroom brief. At what point does the danger inside a failing marriage become visible enough for someone on the outside to act? The boys who stood waiting outside school that February afternoon didn't know their mother had been gone for hours by then. They were just waiting for someone who always came.